Greetings, everybody. And again, a special hello to our colleagues in primary and lower secondary teacher education, who've been working for more than 3 years now to implement the new integrated master's programs. I'm Marilyn Cochran-Smith, the Cawthorn Professor of Teacher Education at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College in the US. I'm also the chair of the International Advisory Panel on Teacher Education. And I'm thrilled to be here today to be part of the launch of the panel's final report. The report has 3 parts, and we'll be concentrating in this video and on several others that are being made by my fellow panel members on the recommendations in parts 2 and 3 of the report. But I did want to take just a minute to say something about part 1 of the report. We asked NOKUT to write the first chapter. It provides a wealth of information about the history and scope of teacher education in Norway. The panel wrote the rest of the report. In the second chapter of part 1, we locate Norway's reform in the larger international context, and we suggest that Norway's reform is internationally distinctive and very ambitious. In the rest of that chapter, we describe the work of the panel. Many of you already know a lot about that work because you've been part of it. But I do recommend that you take the time to read part 1 of the report. I think it's worth the report. I want to turn now to the report's recommendations to the Ministry of Education and Research and NOKUT. Other videos will talk about the recommendations to the teacher education institutions, or TEIs, and their school partners. First, a few words about where our recommendations come from. We based our recommendations on 5 bodies of knowledge and experience: the national and international experience of the panel collectively, our read and interpretation of existing policy documents in Norway that have to do with teacher education, our work with NOKUT, and especially their translation and creation of many reports for the panel. What we learned from our experiences working with the TEIs and the schools at 9 regional and national meetings over 3 years. And finally, our review and analysis of relevant aspects of the international research. Our report makes 4 recommendations for the ministry and NOKUT. They have to do with accountability, partnerships and school-based days for student teachers, sustainability, and funding. Because our recommendations are intended to match Norway's aspirations, we organized all of our recommendations in the same way. So for all of the recommendations, we talk first about Norway's aspirations for core aspects of the reform. But then we talk about potential challenges or obstacles that might interfere with the accomplishment of those aspirations. Next, we talk about insights from the research, the international research, and other forms of evidence. And then we turn to our recommendations. So let me take some time to talk about the 4 major recommendations that we make to the ministry and to NOKUT. In terms of accountability, it's clear that Norway aspires to a system based on professional responsibility and agency, a system that fosters local innovation rather than uniformity and compliance, and a system that takes an inclusive approach to collaboration with stakeholders. But there are challenges. The reform is being implemented in a relatively short time frame. There are multiple national regulations, frameworks, and guidelines, and Norway has in place a relatively top-down monitoring system for higher education. The international research suggests several insights in this area. It emphasizes the idea that to be successful, external accountability agencies need to create the conditions for strong internal accountability, or what has been theorized in teacher education as intelligent professional responsibility. The report makes several key recommendations about accountability. Extend the timeline for auditing to allow the full 5-year program to be implemented and to allow the institutions to experience the intended and unintended consequences of the reform. We recommend that after 7 years, there be a formative and participatory evaluation that takes place. We also recommend that there is the provision of resources for the implementation of the reform, including the sponsoring of meetings, national and regional, that give people an opportunity to come together to share their research and innovations and have an opportunity to talk about problems and issues. We also recommend that the number and specificity of national regulations be reduced. And finally, we recommend that the aim be to create the conditions for intelligent accountability. So let's now consider our recommendations for TEI school partnerships and for the school experiences of student teachers. And I want to note that there are additional recommendations about partnerships and school experiences in part 3 of the report. And those recommendations are intended for the TEIs and the schools themselves. It's clear that collaboration and joint responsibility are key parts of the country's aspirations to prepare professional practitioners who learn through research and inquiry throughout the entire course of the professional lifespan. But again, there are challenges. Traditionally, different government agencies have had oversight of the education of teachers on one hand, and the education of young people in schools on the other hand. And because teacher education institutions have had the primary responsibility for teacher education, they've also had the control, which is difficult to share. In addition, there's a perception among school-based educators in Norway, and I should add in a number of other countries, that student teachers are not really adequately prepared for the actual work of teaching. The international research is clear that successful school-university partnerships require systems-level support. They also require long-term resources, and they require shared governance. In terms of student-teacher school experiences, the international research consistently indicates that beginning teachers think student teaching is an incredibly important part of learning to teach, but simply having more time in schools isn't the answer. The research shows that what really matters is the nature and quality of the practice periods, what student teachers actually have an opportunity to do and think about and inquire about while they're in the schools. The research also indicates that high-performing countries focus on extended school-based experiences for their student teachers and preparing them to be teacher researchers and inquirers. Our report makes these recommendations about partnerships and school experiences. We recommend that you develop a new national partnership model that includes coordination among and across the existing organizations. Establish broad general principles for partnerships. Provide the resources for TEIs and schools to have full agency and joint responsibility for teacher education with some direct funding to the schools. And we recommend that this funding provide for the people in the schools who do the work of teacher education, who are liaisons with the universities and so on. Our report also makes these policy recommendations about student teachers' school experiences. Move away from the model of counting practice days and move toward a rich model of quality professional school experiences for student teachers. Require that teacher education institutions and their school partners jointly foster the conditions for student teachers in years 4 and year 5 of the program to have inquiry-rich and coherent school experiences that are long enough and connected enough for them to engage in the central activities of teaching. The next area is sustainability. It's clear that the 5-year integrated master's programs are a key part of the country's comprehensive effort to permanently upgrade the quality of the teacher force. However, as always, there are some challenges and potential obstacles. One of these is reform fatigue. Another is fragmentation of national and professional efforts. There's also been the erosion of professional identity for some newly merged teacher education institutions. In addition, the spread and geographic dispersal of teacher educators and programs in Norway can be a challenge. And the potential lack of infrastructure and inadequate resources is also a serious concern. The international research suggests several insights. The research suggests that successful teacher education reforms require a systems-level approach and an adequate external reform infrastructure. This means attending to the mechanisms that support collective responsibility, the technical, human, and social capital tools and resources that are needed over the long haul. Our report makes these recommendations about sustainability. Put a moratorium on further reforms of primary and lower secondary teacher education until the 5-year integrated master's programs are fully implemented and fully integrated into the university programs. Strengthen the external reform infrastructure with actions like establishing a permanent group to provide systems-level coordination, leadership coaching for new TEI deans, and support for local teacher education school partnerships. Provide permanent mechanisms and funding for national coordination and leadership of the 5-year integrated master's programs with continuation of the regional and national meetings. Support and fund ongoing research within and across the TEIs and their school partners about the nature, the quality, and the impact of the new master's programs. The panel thinks that this is an enormous opportunity with great potential to add to the knowledge base about teacher education. So we hope that there will be the opportunity to support and fund research at every TEI school partnership and across them. Finally, we return to funding. Throughout our report, we make it clear that we strongly support Norway's ambitious goals for primary and lower secondary teacher education. However, underfunding is a serious challenge to the success of the reform, especially because of stricter requirements for academic staff with PhD qualifications. The way the school-based experiences for student teachers are financed without credits for required practice days in schools. A 25% increase in the number of students, which of course requires more teaching space, more facilities, and other resources, as well as a heavier advising demand for the R&D assignment in the third year, and supervision and advising of the master's thesis. And also a potential problem, we believe, is the current classification of primary and lower secondary teacher education programs. Although simply throwing money at problems related to teacher quality and teacher education does not solve these problems, the international research suggests that major reforms almost always require additional funding over the long haul in order to succeed. Our report recommends moving the new 5-year master's programs in primary and lower secondary teacher education from Category D to Category C in Norway's higher education funding system to cover the cost of increased general operations. We also recommend funding specific initiatives, some of which I've already mentioned, and these are mentioned throughout the report. So we suggest that specific initiatives related to research capacity building, program integration, partnerships, and school experiences, and advising and supporting the master's thesis be made available. So that was a whirlwind tour of our report's recommendations to the Ministry of Education and Research and to NOKUT. I'm going to sign off now, but I'd like to close with a few words directly from the report. It has been a great challenge, but also a distinct professional pleasure for the members of the panel to work as partners over a significant period of time with Norwegian teacher education institutions, schools, and other stakeholders in teacher education. It's also been an honor to work with our dedicated NOKUT colleagues who supported our efforts and provided essential information, guidelines, and analyses. We're really hopeful that all the groups and individuals in Norway who care about the future of primary and lower secondary teacher education will find this report thoughtful, useful, and maybe even inspiring. As panel members, we look forward both to following the progress of the reform as it continues through its first cycle and beyond, and to learning from the experiences of our Norwegian teacher education colleagues. Best wishes, and thank you.